Vice President and Trade Finance Relationship Manager for mp4 Bank. He assists customers with international financial needs, including trade services, structured trade finance, government exports, as well as foreign exchange strategies. So he's based here in Seattle, but his territory, fortunately, is Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. Same with Washington, D.C. So I really appreciate the 35 years of expertise he brings to this topic. You can read more about his storied history in your agenda packet. So please join me in welcoming Tim Rasmussen from mp4 Bank.
All right, so I'm here to keep you guys awake after lunch. I'll see how I do in a half an hour, okay? You know, when actually the title was given to me, and I really like it. I was thinking tips and traps. I immediately thought of Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. I was thinking about putting a slide up there, but probably would have got sued by Warner Brothers, so I didn't do it. So just audience participation time. Just by show of hands, how many people are exporting right now? Okay. And keep your hand up if you do more than 5 countries. Good. And more than 10. Awesome. Okay. So I thought I'd start off with some trade statistics. Most of these you probably have seen before. Only 4% of the companies that export are large. I hope I'm not stealing any Diane's thunder here. 96 are SMEs. 95% of the customers, 96% of the customers are outside the U.S. borders. Only 4% of Washington companies export, which is never that kind of surprising. It's considered the most trade-dependent state in the nation. And our 5 top destinations there for exports out of Washington State are China, Canada, Japan, UAE, and UK. So just a quick overview on what I'm going to talk about. How do I get started? How do I get paid, which is probably the most important question. Or when do I get paid? A little bit about foreign exchange, a little bit about the government guarantee programs that banks work with you to utilize, and I've got a couple of case studies in the very end. So I'm going to take a half a step back, and for those companies that are exporting, maybe for those that are thinking about exporting, how do you do it? Do you decide that you're going to have a sales team here in the U.S.? Are you going to maybe go off to a trade show and you find a distributor that you like and you say, hey, can you sell my stuff in Germany for me? Or can you sell my stuff in the EU? Or perhaps you put some boots on the ground and hire an employee overseas. Or the last is maybe a consideration on, do you need an ISO certification or a foreign certification to sell into that market? And to answer for some of those questions, the USIAC here in Seattle, Department of Commerce, either Washington, Oregon, Idaho, are all very helpful to answer those questions. So how do I get paid? So as exporters, you're looking at the top line there. So the least secure for you is to send your goods off and pray, right? Open account. Next one over is documentary collections, then letters of credit, and then finally prepayment, which is everybody's favorite if you're an exporter, but are you really going to get someone to prepay you? Maybe if you've got the right commodity, you'll probably have to meet somewhere in between. Another term that some folks sell in is a mixed term. So maybe you get some money now, and maybe you get some money when you ship your goods, or maybe you get some money when the goods land overseas. So any of these combinations are well, the risk will grow as you get further down toward open account. So what banks can help you with are letters of credit and documentary collections. I'll dive a little bit deeper into those, just so you have an idea. And I've got some arrows that fly around with pretty pictures and all kinds of things like that. So let's say that you've decided that you're not going to sell them on a prepaid basis because they push back on you. And you're not going to sell them on an open account basis because you want to make sure you get paid. So the next best thing from prepayment is to get a letter of credit. So you agree with your buyer that you're going to get a letter of credit, and they're going to go to their bank, and they're going to give the application to the issuing bank. And the issuing bank will send it to your bank electronically, usually by a system called SWIFT, which probably most of you have heard of. And then the bank is going to take a look at that letter of credit for you. And they're going to authenticate it, which is probably the most important thing, to make sure it's a real letter of credit. but they're also going to look through the LC for the terms and conditions to make sure that what we see on paper makes sense to us. An example of that might be, let's say the trade terms are cost, insurance, and freight. And we look at the documents that are required in the letter of credit, and there's no insurance document required. So we would go back to the other bank on his behalf and say, hey, where's the insurance policy? Why didn't you include that? So that's basically the extent initially of what the bank does for you when they authenticate it, what we call advise, pass on the letter of credit. So that letter of credit comes to you now, and you look it over and make sure that everything's in there that was in the agreement that you had from before. Can I make a ship date? Can I get my goods on a boat in time for a letter of credit date? Are the documents required documents that I can generate? Is the letter of credit aligned? Is the expiration date out far enough? Is the amount right? Are the unit prices right? Your banker is not going to know any of the answers to those questions, but if you look at that and everything looks fine, then you'll probably go ahead and prepare your documentation. And you'll send that documentation onto the bank. We'll check that as your advocate and make sure that everything due to the terms and conditions of the letter of credit are complied with. Now, if there's a problem with the letter of credit, we can let you know that, and if you still have time to fix it or cure the discrepancies, as we call them, then you can repair that and send it to us. We'll forward those documents over to the issuing bank, where they'll be checked again. And once that occurs, the bank basically has 5 days to check letters of credit documents, according to the letter of credit rules. Everything's fine. They won't ask the importer if they can debit their account. They will simply take the money and pay. There we go. Take the money, documentation goes to the exporter or importer rather, and payment comes to us or you. So that's how a letter of credit works. And this example is what I would call a site letter of credit, which means basically once it hits the issuing bank, they've got 5 days to look at it. Now perhaps your salesperson, much to your chagrin, has negotiated that there's 30 days term under the letter of credit. So you have to wait 30 days to get paid, but you do have bank risk. You do have a banker's acceptance that's been created. And so you have a relatively good certainty, 99.9%, that you're going to get the money on maturity. What some folks do is they will approach their bank to discount that draft so they can get paid today. 98 cents to the dollar, whatever the number is, depending on the country risk and buyer risk. So if you are in a situation where you're getting a letter of credit in that has that time feature to it, you might want to approach your bank before you present your documents and make sure that they're willing to discount it. Otherwise, you're going to have to wait for your money. So that's a pretty common feature of what we do for our letter of credit customers. We're strong in China and Korea, and then other countries as our customer needs them. Another thing to remember about letter of credit is it's the opportunity to ship, not the obligation. So it's not a contract. So if you get a letter of credit in, and maybe it's a commodity letter of credit, and all of a sudden the price moves way against you, you probably never ship against that letter of credit, right? Because it wouldn't make any financial sense. You could go out and pay for market and sell the goods for more. One thing from the last speaker is, banks have all the security software behind the scenes in our back office system for OFAC and BIS. So, of course, if we catch something, we have to report it too. So don't get anything bad, right? We also have red flags that we follow to make sure that everything's okay.
Quick question.
Of course.
Reporting. So when you guys are going to report, do you notify your customer before you report?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
And after you make the report, do you notify them?
No. It's not that I'm mean, it's our rules.
I just want to make sure everybody understood.
And now we're going to mean Tim. Okay, I got it. All right. So the next one I'm going to talk about is documentary collections. And I kind of call it the little brother, little sister to a letter of credit. The benefit is that you've got banks in between, sort of almost like an escrow situation as intermediaries, but you don't have to promise to pay like you do with a letter of credit. So when an issuing bank issues a letter of credit, they're promising to pay if the terms and conditions are complied with. This is sort of a little like open account with an escrow. So let's walk through the transaction. Same agreement between the buyer and the seller, exporter, importer, whatever you want to call them. So the exporter will send their documents to their bank, who'll send them over to the collecting bank, where they're going to sit. And what happens is, the collecting bank lets the importer know, okay, I've got documents for you here at my counters, let me know when you want to pay. Well, if you can imagine, the goods are on the ocean, it's going to take 40 days to get there, they're going to tell the bank in day 38, right? So you've just given them 38 days of float. But your title document, your trade, your bill of lading is part of that stack of documents. So they can't get the goods without paying for them. You're just not getting paid as quickly as you would with whatever. Usually if you're dealing with someone on a document trade payment basis, yeah, you know them better than you know them for a letter of credit or for an open account. So it's not a situation where you necessarily need to worry. It's just that you're not going to get paid quite as quickly as you would for it. So this is documents against payment, which means you don't get the documents without paying for them. So we debit the customer, paperwork goes to the importer, we get the funds for you and credit your account and that proceeds. So that's how a DP works. The other flavor of a documentary collection is what we call a DA, or a documents against acceptance. So it's very similar to that time draft that I mentioned under a letter of credit. So it starts out the same way. We've got the documents going over to the collecting bank, sitting there. But this time, when we get the arrival notice, we give the importer, if I were the collecting bank, give the importer the opportunity to sign a draft, which is basically a promissory note. We call it a trade acceptance. And once they give us that trade acceptance, let's say the maturity on that is July 31st. The bank will pass the documents to them. So now we know, supposedly, because it's the customer's risk, they're not a bank risk, that they're going to get paid on July 31st. So the risk here is it's just one notch above open account. If for whatever reason the importer walks away from the transaction, you have to sue the importer in their country. Does that happen very often? I've seen it happen twice in 3 years. So it's not a big problem, and clearly if you're selling on a DA basis, you know the customer very, very well. You know the buyer very well. In some countries, they have to deal either with a letter of credit or with the documentary collection due to currency control situations. So sometimes you can't get away from this, and a DA is sort of a friendly way to deal in business with those. And then, of course, at the end, on maturity, July 31st, you get paid. So, anyone here done a standby letter credit before? So, a standby letter credit can be handy domestically. So the bottom three are reasons why you might use one domestically. Let's say K&L Gates comes into this building. This beautiful building's been built out, tenant improvements have been made, and the landlord of the building says, okay, I just spent $500,000 building out your space. I need to stand by for $500,000 for 3 years to make sure you don't fail on your lease. So think of a standby letter of credit like a default instrument, or almost like an insurance policy, where a commercial letter of credit, like we were talking about when you export, is the active payment instrument, the transactional instrument. In unpaid invoices, you can use a standby letter of credit to act like a credit line, or to have the supplier give you a credit line, so you can be net 30 and they know if you don't pay them in time, they can come to the standby letter of credit and get made whole. On the foreign side, you may be bidding on a project in Egypt, for instance, or maybe Syria. Just kidding. Actually, I used to do a lot of standby letters of credit for Egypt for the railroads, and the way that it works is they would say, you can't bid on this project unless you give me a local guarantee from an Egyptian bank. So the way that we remedy that is we would issue a standby letter of credit to an Egyptian bank. They would do a guarantee basically on the creditworthiness of our standby so that our customer could bid on the project. You might also use it for warranty or other purposes where they're looking for some security where that standby letter of credit can hang out for a little while. So here's a little graphic on how that works. We've got the contract between the applicant and the beneficiary. In this case, let's just say I'm issuing a standby letter of credit for you so you can bid a project in pick a country, Turkey. So unlike a standby letter, or unlike a commercial letter of credit, a lot of times we won't go through an advising bank. We may just go direct to the beneficiary. But because the primary reason for advising the bank is to authenticate, probably in this case we would transfer the waivers. We would probably send it through an advising bank that the beneficiary called out. So hopefully that makes sense. So foreign exchange, sometimes when you are dealing with a customer, you don't have the option to deal in US dollars. Maybe they come to you and say, you know, you can have this deal, but I'm going to pay you in euro, or I'm going to pay you in Singapore dollars. So how can you get around that? What I would suggest, and what I suggest to a lot of our customers, is to use a forward contract. So let's say, for instance, you know you're going to get $1 million Singapore dollars sometime in the month of July. You can come to your banker and say, I need to buy a forward contract for the window of the variable rate of the 1st to the 31st of July, and we will sell you a contract so that when you get delivery of those Singapore dollars, you've already locked your rate in, locked your margin in, you don't have to worry about sleeping at. Your banker is going to want to have a line of credit for that. Generally, we'll hold 10% as the margin of the contract. And the reason for that is because if you don't get that $1 million of Singapore, and you have to deliver to us because you made a contract to us. So you'd have to go out to the open market and buy $1 million of Singapore in order to fund your contract. Well, hopefully the difference between buy and sell is more 10%. That's sort of a magic number. Banks aren't hard to pass them 10%, sometimes it's 5. More risky currency, sometimes it's 20, but that's why they're asking for a notional amount on the contract. And the swaps is basically a two-legged transaction where you've got two currencies. One into spot, one's into forward, and you flip it the other way. So that allows you to, are long in one currency and short in another, but you need that money later, you can use a swap. Does that make sense to everybody? Probably not the swap part, that confuses me too. But, okay. Another thing that I find is beneficial to a lot of customers is to perhaps hold a foreign currency account. Especially in our neck of the woods, a lot of folks have a Canadian account. They've got Canadian inflows, Canadian outflows. If you don't have a Canadian account, you're going to be getting US dollars and it's been converted by a Canadian bank, and then when you have to send Canadian money back up, you're buying Canadian for me to send out. So you can save yourself somewhere between 0.5% and 1%, or maybe even 2% by using a Canadian account. I have one customer that says that they're saving $40,000 a year by not converting that. So, you know, it's real money, real numbers. So I want to talk a little bit about some guarantee programs that the U.S. government and the SBA have. So probably everybody's heard about Exim Bank. It was in the news. It took a long time to get reauthorized. It's still not really fully running because they don't have a quorum. They can't approve big deals, so Boeing, General Electric, and Cummins, people like that are screwed right now. But for littler people, where they don't need more than, I can't remember what the number is. It's a pretty big number where they need that. It has to go before the board. Export working capital. Our working capital program is a wonderful tool because it gives your bank the ability to do higher advance rates on raw material, work in process, and inventory. So typically banks may loan, depending on what the raw material is, they may loan you 20, 30% on the raw material. They're probably loaning you nothing on WIP, and maybe 50 to 75% on inventory. So with the Exim Bank guarantee, we can go 75% across the board and 90% on foreign receivables for credit insurance. And I actually have one customer here in Seattle where Exim Bank waived the credit insurance piece because the other party was their us. So they go, well, their receivables are probably okay. SBA has got a working capital program, but it caps at $5 million. There's no cap on the Exim program. The international trade loan is pretty sweet. It can be used for a number of different things. You can buy land where you're going to build a building where you can export. You can expand your plant for the purpose of export. You can buy machinery. There's a lot of different things that you can do with the ITL. And the Export Express is really a smaller program. It goes up to $500,000 only. But it can be used, a lot of people use it for maybe going to a trade show, getting their web page translated, a number of different reasons. And all of those programs, with the exception of the Export Express, carry a 90% guarantee for your banker. So your banker is happy when it happens. Export Express, it's 90% up to $350,000, and then up to $500,000, it's 75%. Yes?
With regard to the international trade loan, do you require your borrowers to have a facility up and running within a certain period of time? How do you enforce the requirement that it be related to export?
I haven't done them for a couple of years, so that writing may have changed. But it typically would follow a natural life cycle. So if you're acquiring the land, you're building the building, and getting the permits, if it's reasonable, it would be fine. And the way the SBA looks at it is they're looking for some sort of certification that says, this is why I'm doing this is what I'm building for. And I hate to say it's loosey-goosey, but it's pretty general. Any other questions before I go on? Yeah.
Do either of those add significant time for consideration and approval of the loan? So what would be your normal loan process?
That's a great question. So just use us as an example. We're a delegated lender at the $5 million level. So if the loan is $5 million or smaller for Exim Bank, we can approve it ourselves and just get a loan number. For SBA, they underwrite everything. So SBA can take longer. And for the Export Express, we're a delegated lender. And the reason I said some limitations apply, sure, let me get time here, is because Exim Bank does have some restrictions to commodity. Military is a no-no for them. SBA is agnostic to the commodity type. SBA is also agnostic to content of the goods. So you could buy something in Canada and ship it to Mexico and it's an export. Exim Bank has got to be 51% U.S. content. U.S. content can be labor, it can be the parts, it can be depreciation. It's pretty creative, but it does have to be 51%. Because really, all these programs are about U.S. jobs and getting more folks working and increasing our exports as well. Yeah.
In the situation where a government agency is going to these loans, what's the process that triggers payment by that agency? Is it bankruptcy?
Basically, yes. So Exim Bank takes a first lien position on all the exports, so they'll liquidate themselves. We're in a second position for export because we're enjoying a 90% guarantee. So I would think it's bankruptcy. They don't pay out a lot. They're pretty, as a delegated lender, we're pretty careful not to step over that line. And when they underwrite it themselves, they're pretty careful too. I mean, they make money every year with the exception, I think, of 1 year in the last 10 years. So they give money back to the Treasury, which always surprised me when people were thinking it was corporate welfare. They're paying your taxes for you, right? So I think that was all on that page, unless somebody has another question. I can take questions after you. I got a couple minutes. So credit insurance. This is how you sleep at night when you sell an open account. So you can get credit insurance from Exim Bank, provided that the commodity is something that they'll do. I like the Exim credit insurance because it's pay-as-you-go. Most private insurers have a minimum premium somewhere around $10,000 or $15,000 or $20,000. So you give them $20,000, and that's how much money you give until you break loose of that $20,000. So for private credit insurance, I think the magic number is around $2 million. If you're doing $2 million in export sales, you can do all of your exporters. You can do one exporter. It's kind of up to you. Usually it's up to 90% covered, depending on the commodity. Sometimes it might be lower, 85 or 80. As I said, it supports open account sales. Sometimes you'll find if you are competing in a country like in the EU, everybody uses credit insurance pretty much. So if you're going in there and say, pay me now or give me a letter of credit, they're blowing you off because everybody else is selling credit insurance and that's the terms they're used to. So you're at a competitive disadvantage if you don't have it there. And then more on the domestic side is if you've got, say, one customer that's got a large concentration, maybe 30, 35, 40% of your business, that makes your bank really nervous. So if you buy credit insurance to mitigate that concentration, your banker is much happier. It'll probably take 2 years. Glad you guys are staying with me almost done. So I just thought I'd do a couple of really quick case studies. So the first one is, and this is a real customer that I have in Hillsboro, Oregon. They're a scrap seller of steel and other metals, and they were struggling with the fact that, you see the guys driving the truck, right, with all the metal and the computer parts and things like that. So, they're having to pay cash and barrelhead, but yet the goods weren't getting to India or Japan for 45 or 60 weeks. So what can they do? Well, the answer is we got them an SBA export working capital line of credit, And because they had been dealing with those customers for so long, much like the case I mentioned for Exxon, they waived the requirement for credit insurance. So yes, they had to pay the SBA line fee that goes to SBA, not to us, but they were able to get the working capital they needed in order to operate their business. So the next example I have is a company that we actually acquired from another bank. So they were bidding to build a locomotive for a railroad in Tanzania. And they were the bank that is now no longer around. And they said, hey, we need to bid on this project, but we don't know how to do it. Well, they didn't know how to do it either, so they just sat up and standby letter credit application for about 3 months. Sad story is they didn't get the bid, but if it would have come to us or another bank, we would have issued a standby letter of credit, and the counter guarantee would have been issued locally, and they would have got the deal. But I'm happy to say they're doing very, very well. A wonderful customer. And the final example I have is you've got a contract in hand, but you've got currency controls, so you can't get money out of the country. You want to get prepaid, but they can't do it. They can't get the money. Maybe not Venezuela, but think Venezuela. So what can you do? Perhaps they can get an export letter of credit approved by the government, so they can get those dollars that they need to pay you. And once you get the letter of credit, as I mentioned before, timing is probably 3 to 5 days, 10 on the outside, you're going to get paid for the transaction. So now you've been able to complete the transaction. You get paid quickly, where there was no sale before. So I think I tucked it in 27, yeah.